Hey everyone, welcome to part two of a special Hey Docs episode with your guest host, Jordann Killion. In part one, we were getting to know the one and only Jill Allen. In part two, it's all about Jill Allen and Associates and what consulting with our team actually looks like. From how our services are designed to the benefits of working with a consultant, we're getting granular. Let's get started.
By now, we all know I talk to a lot of doctors and give advice to practices in every stage of their life cycle. And one question my docs ask all the time is, who do you recommend for marketing to attract more new patients from the internet? My answer? Easy. I have been recommending Mary Kay Miller and her team at Kaleidoscope for the better part of a decade. Why? They're thorough, professional, and transparent. Kaleidoscope Digital Marketing is who you want to talk to because they understand how to market in the orthodontic world and they offer tools that are affordable and easy to use. I'm telling you, if you're looking to step up your digital presence, Kaleidoscope should be your first call. Go to contactkl.com to request your free digital marketing consultation. That's contactkl.com.
All right. Welcome back to part two. So fun to do this special episode with you. I really think that our audience is going to take a lot from it. So, as we're rolling into the next part of the Jill Allen and Associates journey, I want to switch gears a little bit and start talking a little bit more about the company Jill Allen and Associates and what we do in the industry more so than your journey into the business
Sure.
world. So, can you talk to the audience a little bit about what they can expect services wise when they choose to work with JA&A?
Sure. If somebody didn't listen to the previous episode, or if you're wondering what we do, I think most people know I primarily focus on business consulting with startups and acquisitions. But I do a lot of work with what I like to say are 8 years to retirement crowds, working with doctors, established practices where we are maybe helping them get ready to sell. So maybe we're not quite ready to let the team know that we are getting ready to maybe make a transition, but we're starting to think about it. And I think this is an area for, especially for a lot of my senior docs, where we know if we're going to get ready to sell, there's a lot of pieces that need to be in place. So we're helping them just clean up their books and their system, helping them just get maybe 3 years of P&Ls moving in the right direction or whatnot so that we're going to be there. And then the other area we work a lot in is just that existing practice training. But I would say we maybe differ a little bit from some of the other consultants where we aren't always working on next level training in regard to, I've got a $3 million practice and I just need to adjust my levers a little bit and move things. We're really more what I would say consultants where we're down in the trenches. So maybe we've got existing practices that have lost some institutional knowledge and they're saying, oh my gosh, I just lost my financial coordinator and I need to get somebody in and get them trained and up to speed. Or I just had a big transition with my team where, again, all of that institutional knowledge was there. They're now retiring, moving out, whatever is happening. And I've got a lot of newbies, and we're realizing that we don't have the systems or the protocols that we think we need in place to sustain where we're at. So we help a lot in that area too.
Okay. So, it's a lot of services entail things like training in core areas, and
Mhm.
they entail things like looking over the books and setting goals and marketing. It's really an all encompassing type of program or
Yeah.
package when
Yeah,
you work
for
with Joe Allen and
Yeah,
Associates.
for sure. And one of the things I like to talk to my doctors about is if it's a startup or an acquisition, we've got a very succinct way of doing things is that, but we never take a cookie cutter approach to what we do. And that has been important to me from the very beginning when I started this industry is I really wanted to meet each of my doctors and each of my teams right where they were at and determine what were their objectives, not what's Jill Allen's objective, but what's their objectives. And so a lot of times we will put together a package that's going to work according to the objectives that a doctor is looking for, so that we can also do training that matches maybe the team's core values or just different things, culture. Like, just because I always use this analogy, one way to bake a cake, or let me back that up. There's not one way to bake a cake. There's multiple ways to bake a cake. And just because you may be familiar with the Betty Crocker way doesn't mean that you can't do it old school and go all the way back to flour and sugar, or you can't pop a mug in the microwave and make a 3-minute cake. So I think for us, it's just really trying to identify what a practice is looking for and then customizing our approach, knowing that we can work in every area, just making sure that we're meeting the goals from the beginning so our objectives are clear.
Yeah, I think that's important. And we're going to get a little bit more into how we cater even our packages depending on the different consulting needs that somebody has, from a startup to an existing to an acquisition. We're going to talk through that. But I'm also wondering if you could talk to the audience a little bit about the pre-startup portion of a contract with Jill Allen and Associates, because people talk about all the time. We've talked about it, I feel like, ad nauseum on this episode, but just we do help with a lot of startups. But I don't think people understand what we do and actually what point in their journey to actually bring Jill Allen and Associates into the picture. Where do you come on board? What are you offering them even before doors open? And like, where are you adding value to their practice before they even begin that beginning of
Yeah.
their practice?
Yeah, for sure. This is such an interesting thing. And again, I think every doctor is going to put value on different points when it comes to the startup. And we'll probably get into this, but where I might put value and where a doctor might put value are two different things. But when I'm working with a startup practice, I usually say we're going to work in two phases. And the first phase is always going to be ideally demographics to doors open. And within that phase, I'm helping my doctors review demographics to determine where their practice is going to be. Because for me, if I'm going to work with any doctor that's doing a startup practice, my ideal is that I have and am working with them when they're at the point of starting to decide on that location. Because ultimately, if we can get demographics, what it's going to do is it's going to help give us the facts behind, is this area going to support another orthodontic practice? Instead of just, I like the space. It's a cool area. It feels good. So therefore, I'm going to do a startup practice. And I think not that with sheer will and grit, you probably can't make a practice go, but gosh, wouldn't it be easier to know that the demographics are in your favor for a successful practice than just making that square peg fit into the round hole and fighting tooth, claw, and nail to make a successful orthodontic practice. When we're in that startup phase, I help. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. I can help and will help with everything from contract negotiations to office design and flow, all the way through helping them make decisions on equipment. We're working with budget. I have a lot of companies that we work with and making sure, from equipment to architects to software, just really helping a doctor all the way through. And I always tell docs, if you've had a chance to talk to me or if you ever call me, my goal is to make sure that I have a step-by-step guide of every single possible thing that you have to do and will be thinking about before your doors open. But my goal is to make sure that we're keeping it in a very controlled, not that it's not going to be stressful, but a very controlled environment as we're moving through getting towards opening, and that we just are not missing anything. So I always tell my docs, I promise you, if it's keeping you up at night, it's on my list and we will work through it at the appropriate time. And probably one of the biggest things that I see docs make mistakes on, sometimes they'll come to me later once they're into the process and then feeling super overwhelmed, is there's a lot of people out there giving advice and there's a lot of things coming at you. And sometimes you can make the wrong decisions out of order. And my goal has always been, in doing this for 18 years, I know exactly when we need to make the right decisions at the right time, so that things feel very coordinated and we're not just randomly making decisions and having it feeling overwhelming the whole way through that startup process.
Yeah, I think that's important for listeners to hear, especially if you're some of those listeners that maybe haven't started using Jill Allen and Associate Services yet, or you're maybe still in school and you're trying to figure out if this is going to be that path. We both know, and I think everybody that is any bit entrepreneurial knows that there are people that want structure and there are people that just want to go for it. And both are great. But if you're looking for that structure and you're looking for that guide and you're looking for that kind of person to come alongside and say, here's what to do next. And I promise the next thing will come. And when this thing keeps you up at night, you can ask me. That's really what the Jill Allen and Associates pre-startup phase is for, is to help guide you through that step-by-step process to make sure that it goes well, to make sure that you get everything done. And your budget is spent appropriately. And when doors are open, you're actually excited that they're open and not stressed out and wondering what the heck you did.
Yeah. But it's and I think the other thing too, Jordan, is again, because I love business so much and my goal is ultimately to help doctors be successful. I really look at myself as an advocate. I'm probably the only one out there working solely to make sure that the doctors are not taken advantage of, because every equipment specialist wants to sell equipment and everybody out there thinks that doctors are made of money, and when we've got this big budget, it's nothing. And so many times I have to have these hard conversations with docs and be like, "Hey, no, I don't think this is in your best interest. I'm going to tell you what I see. I'm going to tell you ultimately, doc, it's your decision. But let me just speak as a neutral party here. It doesn't matter to me which marketing company you use. It doesn't matter to me which architect you use. It doesn't matter to me which bank you use. It doesn't matter to me which commercial broker you use. But here's a red flag that I'm seeing, or here's something you should be aware of." And I think, again, for most doctors, you're going to do a practice once. I've had the opportunity to do this for 18 years. I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of practices at this point. And even seeing something as silly as something in a lease, you may say, "Jill, why would you do lease review?" Because there are a lot of things that get missed. I've probably reviewed more leases than most commercial brokers have reviewed, just for how long I've been doing this now. Is there a chance that I may catch something on a lease that even a commercial broker misses before we get to a lawyer? Absolutely. Just things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just having somebody in your corner that knows. I think you hit on kind of one of the biggest aspects of that pre-startup phase is you have done this so many times. You
Mm-hmm.
have done it so many times that you're going to see things and you're going to catch red flags that other people might not even have a clue at. And so it just really gives you that peace of mind that this is going to go well because I have somebody in my corner that knows exactly what is and how that should look and what I should be doing by the end of it, no matter which way I choose to go within my startup
Yeah.
practice. So, as a tangent onto that question, when should somebody get you involved? What is the right time to bring Jill Allen and Associates on for that pre-startup phase?
Yeah, I think if we're doing the startup, my ideal is always, if you're thinking of doing a startup, I always like to do a free consultation. And I think everybody knows that, just to get a feel for where you're at. And I'll tell you, Jordan, you know this, but I've talked to doctors for 5 years where we're just communicating a little bit here and there as they're working their way towards a startup. But I think when you're getting serious, when you're starting to look at demographics, and if you're going to choose to do demographics first, which I highly advise that you do, I like to be involved when you're actually starting to pull those demographic reports before you're actually even getting a commercial broker or a banker or anybody involved. Because I think it just warrants some really good discussions about that and about the area. And then from there, moving in. Now, I will have some docs that are like, "Okay, I think I've decided on the area, but I'm still not really ready to commit to anything yet." And I say, "Okay, now that you know the plan, once you get a commercial broker involved and you guys are getting serious about looking at spaces, that to me is like the ideal time if there's going to be a gap between looking at demographics," which again, I have some docs that are like 2 years from now. I know that I'm going to want to do a startup, and I want to talk to you now because I'm getting ready to sign some associateship contracts. And I just want some advice, maybe on non-competes, or if I know where where I want to do my startup. I want to just make sure that I'm thinking ahead about this. So again, if there's going to be a gap, I say the best time is ideally when you are getting and starting to look at spaces. I think the hardest time is when I have a doc call me and they're like, I need to talk to you right now. We're in the middle of lease negotiations. There's so much that happens or that should have happened in that lease negotiations that not that we can't start working together, but sometimes they're way behind the eight ball by that point.
Yeah, I think that's good to know. And for the listeners in the audience that are like, okay, I'm not quite at that point yet, but I still want to get some advice from Jill Allen, my advice to you is listen to the podcast more. Go back through some of those episodes because a lot of what she's talking about in this pre-startup phase and before you get started, you're going to get a lot of good information even before you pull the trigger with Jill Allen and Associates, just from the podcast and the guests and the type of people that we have on.
Yeah. And Jordann, if I could just say one more thing, I do want to talk just a minute about acquisitions too, because I think there's this really key point if a doc is doing an acquisition where a lot of times I think docs who are doing acquisitions think, oh, I'll get a consultant once I buy the practice or once I get going. But my ideal is almost exactly the same as a startup. If you're getting serious, if you've identified a practice, one of the things that I will do is I do a free consultation where I will actually review the data for a doctor and just give a little insight. Again, I'm only advocating for the doctor. I'm not the broker brokering the deal. I don't have any say. I'm not getting a commission on it. But a lot of times if you're getting ready to make a decision on that and you have decided that, yes, this is the practice for me, there is about 3 to 6 months worth of work, especially if a senior doc is not staying on, that needs to happen. And it's things that people don't even think about. And again, I've got a step-by-step guide for this. Are you keeping the website? Or are you not keeping the website? Are you keeping the name? Or are you not keeping the name? What about credentialing? What about the phones? What about the operating system? What about the banking account? All of these things that you think, oh, I'll deal with it when I get in. But when you get in and you get that practice, your focus is going to be on treatment, working on the patients. And it's not on all the team members and all their roles and are they collecting the money the way they need to. And so when we're working with acquisitions, again, like a startup, I think that 3 to 6 month mark is perfect to make sure that everything is in line so that when you get in there, unfortunately, with a lot of times with acquisitions, we'll see that practices tend to lose money or stay flat in their first year. And most of the time, all of their team members are gone before the end of that first year. So if we can help with that or be prepared for you to manage through that, again, that's just going to help you have a leg up as you're moving into that position. Sorry, I just wanted to talk about that because I think it's something that just a lot of people don't really think about and realize when they're in that, again, thinking we only do startups.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even just from my experience in consulting, the idea was, oh, the acquisition might be the easier route. But I don't think actually it tends to really be the easier route. And you might think, oh, because they already have the systems, oh, because they already are running, because they're already doing well, it must be a great practice to go into. And it might be great for that doctor, but you are a new doctor.
Yeah.
And you are a new person and you're going to have new ideas. And so that first year in an acquisition is hard. And those first few months in an acquisition are the hardest. And so I think just having some help and somebody on board at the right time, like what you just spoke to, can be really the difference between your acquisition actually launching and being able to take off and be really comfortable and you being able to do really well, or you could have a few hard years
Yeah.
before things really start to turn around. And so I think that was good advice and kind of segues us into the next question. I think people might be surprised to hear the differences in our approach at Jill Allen and Associates from once a startup is doors open to an acquisition or to an existing practice. I think sometimes the mentality may be, Once doors are open, business is business, practices are the same. The ideas and the structure, it is what it is. So she's going to consult the exact same way, whether I'm a startup doors open, whether I'm an acquisition doors open, or whether I am transitioning out or just an existing practice. But that's not really the case. So, can you talk a little bit about the differences in our approach to each of those types of services that we offer?
Hey docs, let's talk about consumer experience for a minute, specifically the kind of experience where you purchase an item or a service that you've been excited about, only to be let down or disappointed by the actual product or experience. Not a good way to start a relationship. That's why relationships are so highly valued at GC Orthodontics, because they are truly dedicated to the orthodontic specialty. GC Orthodontics is a leading provider of Tomy orthodontic appliances, quality products that have serviced the orthodontic community for well over 50 years. They are focused on providing total solutions that include both digital and analog orthodontic treatment modalities, like brackets, indirect bonding, and clear aligners. It's time to build a long-term relationship with a company that is dedicated to delivering total solutions to your practice. Visit GC Orthodontics at www.gcamerica.com/Jill Allen and see why countless leading clinics have made the switch. Hey docs, let's talk about Smile Suite, because it's not just another scheduling system. It's a game changer in the world of new patient management. And as a proud Smile Suite partner, I've witnessed the incredible impact it has on practices of all sizes. Smile Suite means your new patient calls and web leads are expertly handled 7 days a week, even during nights and weekends. And they offer top-notch customizable presentation software and seamless post-consultation follow-up. It's like having a secret weapon for your practice's success. Curious? Dive into the revolution at getsmilesuite.com. And don't forget to mention Hey Docs to unlock some extra goodies. Elevate your practice with Smile Suite, because every smile deserves a suite of excellence.
Because really it's the same, but not the same at all. You might have the same frosting, but the inside of the cake is completely different.
Yeah, for sure. You're exactly right. And again, I think that goes back to my original thought from the very beginning, is that I'm not going to take a cookie cutter approach to consulting, and my team is not going to take that for each practice. We're going to look at them individually. And to say the startup is a startup and an acquisition is an acquisition and an existing is silly, because the dynamics of every doctor and every team is going to be different. And you truly have to look at it that way. I think when you're dealing with a startup, I think the biggest thing that is, you can have differences in how we order, to how we market, to how we set up our schedule templates. And one of the interesting things that I find a lot is, so many times my docs want to get in and hire somebody. I'm talking about a startup for a minute, where, oh, they've got all this experience coming out of an existing practice. And believe it or not, those employees many times can be the exact reason why a startup practice is failure to launch, because this doctor's trusting in this employee for their experience, but their experience has to do with how we do things in an existing practice, and not how we would do things in a startup practice. And when we talk about a startup, even marketing, we have to go all the way back to the basics. So if they're used to systems already being set up, and now we're taking them back to the basics of, you have to, I always say, like in marketing, there's 4 main pools that we have to set up. And I don't care what anybody else says. If you're a startup practice, you have to do this. We have to have our marketing coming from our referring doctors. And guess what? You have to forge the relationships with those first 4 to 6 referring doctors. They don't just come to you. They don't just show up. You actually have to do the work to get those. I call those our hot till not docs. You have to forge your name out in the community. You don't just people just don't know you're there. And you have to work hard to get in and get with the student, with the schools and the communities and all of that. And then you have to build your online presence. It is important that you're building all of those different things. And then to eventually then doing the contests and the internal marketing. And I think that's a really interesting one, because that facet of marketing really doesn't play in until year 2 and on. But again, somebody who's coming outside with a lot of experience thinks, oh my gosh, we need to be running all these contests and doing all this stuff, and doctor, you need to spend all this money and blah, 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 blah. And we don't need to go talk to those dentists because they don't refer to us anyways. And again, it can be an issue. And I could talk about this in every area. When it's an existing practice, sometimes it's just really identifying within how we coach and where we're at, just some of the systems. There may be 4 systems that are great and in place and we don't need to touch them. And there be maybe a 5th one where we're like, oh, this core area maybe is out of date, or maybe we're bringing in a digital position, or we're bringing in something new. And so we're not just looking at it as let's add in a new position, but how does it affect everything else in the practice? Because it isn't just let's just start this and it'll all work itself out. Especially in a big, busy practice, one change can affect 10 things. And we have to be, as consultants, thinking about that and helping assist that change. And then I would say with the acquisitions, again, a lot of times you may be taking systems that are in place and have worked well for an existing doctor, but those systems may not be what we need moving forward into the future. And so we're saying, okay, how do we migrate what is happening in this training so that we're now setting up systems that are going to be sustainable going into the future? And maybe some of them are a little bit more baseline startup. Maybe some of them are just taking something that worked well. And I always say it doesn't need Jill Allen's name on it. If it's a system that works well, there's a lot of great systems out there. Let's just make sure that it stands the test of time as we're moving forward and moving into the future with those systems. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, I think my takeaway from that, and I hope that the audience is getting this too, is when working with Jill Allen and Associates, the programs and the structures that we have, it's not just, okay, here's our startup. This is exactly what we cover in a startup, and this is what it's like. Here's what we're going to cover. Here's what we're going to go through. This is our existing, and this is our acquisition. You get these 10 topics. We're going to go through them, whether your practice needs them or not. But it's even more granular than that, because it's, okay, your startup is focusing here. You want this type of clientele. You want this type of population. You want this happening in your practice. Here's how we're going to create those systems in your startup. In your acquisition, here is the demographic that you've already acquired, but this is where you want to take the practice. This is the approach we're going to take to help build your practice and to help grow you in the direction that you're looking for as taking over that practice. And then in an existing practice, here are all the things that are working great, and we're not touching them. But we're going to get really into the weeds with you and say, these are the things that aren't working great, and here are the systems we're going to create for you, or here are the minute changes we're going to make to help this one thing that's always been an issue work a little bit better, which I think brings us into our next topic, which is a little bit controversial. So if we're talking consultant advice versus Facebook forum, I think that we can all agree they all have value. They both do have value, because peer to peer, there's a lot of value in getting information from your peers. But also when it comes to specific advice about a specific practice, why do you think a doctor might want to lean a little bit more heavily on a consultant rather than a peer that has found a method of success in their specific demographic or location?
Oh, Jordy, this is a touchy one for sure. And I'm very cautious about this because I have some very strong opinions on this. And I think the biggest thing is it's very interesting. Crowdsourcing is real, whether we do it in our personal life or whether we do it in our business life. And I see it from team members. Because here's the deal, I'm a member of almost all of the Facebook groups out there, except for the closed ones that won't let consultants in. And so I see all the questions and I see all the advice. And what you guys will probably see, if anybody pays attention, is that I don't comment on hardly anything. And the way I look at it is most of the time, I think it's good to crowdsource just to get a temperature of a question from your peers. But almost everybody is giving you their own personal advice. And most of the time, they've done one, maybe two true practices. It's very rare that the person that's giving you the advice has worked in your state, in your area, has done a startup recently, all of this. And so I'll see things like almost doctor shaming for a new doc, like right now in our industry, saying, I'm going to do a startup and it's going to cost me 800,000. And then I'll see all these docs shaming them for how could you possibly spend that much money when they did a startup in the early 2000s when you could easily do a startup. The bank's max would fund a practice for 500,000. And so I think that anytime you are crowdsourcing, whether we're doing it personally or we're doing it professionally, I think you just always have to be very cautious and take it that everybody's going to give their best advice, but ultimately they aren't the expert in your area and they don't truly understand what, and I can tell you this working across the United States and into Canada now, what works even within the same state in different cities or different counties can be very different. And you just can't take everybody's advice that, oh, I did this and it worked for me, therefore it'll work for you. I think that's just something that, that you have to be aware of. And the other thing that I say is how every doctor out there listening can do this on their own. And I get asked this all the time. Why should I spend the money that I'm going to spend on a consultant when I can just ask my friends? They're all willing to give free advice. I'm like, yeah, you absolutely can. Every single one of you are smart enough. You wouldn't be where you are right now if you couldn't do this on your own. My question is, how quickly do you want to get to where you want to get to? And how many times, like I've figured out how you don't need to reinvent the wheel over the last 18 years. And sometimes I think if you want to get to that end goal, making money, whatever it is, as quickly as possible, lean into experts. We would do that if we were going to the gym and wanting to get in shape. We would do that in every other area. And to me, I think, why wouldn't we do that if you're looking at a minimum of almost $1 million investment, whether you're doing an acquisition or a startup? Why wouldn't you use somebody that ultimately just wants to help you be successful and get to your success as quickly as possible? It's a small business expense. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is you're now making business decisions, not just feeling decisions as you're moving forward.
I think that's more of where the nuance comes from in using an expert. That expert has seen multiple practices, multiple iterations of what works and what doesn't work. And things may work for this one friend that you have, or this person that's really successful, because they really honed in their market and their demographic, but yours might be totally different.
Exactly.
And just having that oversight from somebody that has seen it so many different ways be successful, it gives you a little bit more of that advice that is tailored specifically to your goals that somebody else just may not be able to offer, really, in a forum type of situation. What about the connections that you have? Because I think that this is another piece that really adds to your value and the value of consultants in the industries. Do you think that your status contributes to the success rate of your clients because of the connections that you have with different companies? And can you talk a little bit about the connections that you do have and how you use them for clients?
Sure. Definitely with a lot of my startups or acquisitions, I've got a list of who I would say are referral companies. And the reason they're on my list is because they've been vetted. I know that they work well with my startups. I know that they're going to fit our budget. I know that they're going to not mess around with us and get us the results that we're looking for. So I think that there is value to that. A lot of times, just being able to, my clients can talk to different companies and they get little discounts or whatnot. All of that's great. But ultimately, I want my docs to be working with like minded companies a lot of times. And if I have vetted them, I know that they're going to be working with like minded companies. Now, with that being said, it doesn't matter to me, again, who they work with. I have many doctors that'll be like, hey, Jill, I want to use this website company, or hey, Jill, I want to use this, I don't know, graphic designer or whatnot. And I say, that's great. If we can use somebody local, or if I get an opportunity to work with a new company and they're great, I love that. The biggest thing is, do they understand the scope of work that we're looking for, and can they stick to the deadlines that we need to keep your practice and our project moving forward? So I do think that it's beneficial when docs are working with me that they do have this access to a network of people. Again, I've been in the industry for over 32 years now. I've got connections all over the place. And I will guarantee you, if you've got something you're dealing with, I have seen it or heard about it or know something about it at some point, and usually have a connection that I can be like, oh, let me tell you about how we handled it, or let me get you in contact with this person because I think that this is going to help us in this situation or whatnot.
Yeah. Even just my husband is an electrician. He just started his business a year ago. And we are brand new into this. We're startups of our own. And who do we use as a CPA? Where does he get his permitting? What does he actually need to start? Should he be an LLC? Should he be something else? Even just having those connections, if we had somebody to lean on, just like the doctors do, hey, here are some
Mhm.
options for you. Find the best fit for your personality, but
Yep.
here are some people that I know are really good. I think that adds value to a startup that just you can't really quite understand until you're in the middle of it. I don't know. I can look up 15 companies on the internet, but who's good?
Right.
I
Right.
I know
Exactly.
that there's all these companies in the industry, but who's going to really watch out for my best interest or understand my budget and understand how it's different? So I do think that just you add a lot of value just in who you know and how you introduce people. It takes a lot of the pressure off.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're coming towards the end. We have a couple of things left to go over, but I'm wondering if you could share some of the common pitfalls you see when people are beginning their journey of practice ownership.
I think the first one that I will say that I see a lot is maybe doctors underestimating the importance of commitment of time to your business. I usually tell doctors, if we're doing a startup, you need to be able to commit, ideally, my ideal would be 2 days a week to your own practice. And a lot of time doctors are like, but Jill, I won't be doing anything. So can't I just keep, working my associateship job? And here's the deal. If you want a successful practice, you have to be all in. Your practice cannot be your second thought. So if you're working 5 days a week as an associate and you can't step away a day or two and still be financially set and then to be able to focus on your startup, it's going to be very hard for your startup to be successful and for it to take off and hit the numbers that I think a startup should hit in year 1, year 2, and year 3. So I think underestimating the time commitment. I think secondarily, a piece of advice I would give docs is you have to be prepared to do the work. And your team member can't do it for you because more than likely your team member is new into this industry. We're going to help train them. We're going to teach them all about it, but they don't understand our industry. And so if you think that you're just going to go off and work an associateship job and just leave your team member a list of items that they have to do, and you're just going to show up and the business is going to go, it's not. You have to do the work. You have to put in the work. You have to be 100% committed to getting that practice off of the ground. And that work is going to come in the first 3 years. It's not going to be easy. Like I was talking about earlier or on the last podcast, you have to be ready for rejection. You're going to go out there and you're going to put yourself out there. You've gone your whole career being top of your class and people wanting you for your skills and your brains. Now you're going to go out there and put yourself out on the line to forge relationships with dentists and to build your practice in the communities. And it's hard. It's hard on your personality. It's hard on your person. But if you are not committed to doing the work and taking the time, you may not be ready yet to do a startup. And then I think the last piece of advice, and this is a twofold answer, is if you are going to hire a consultant, whether it's me or somebody else out there in the industry, you and your team members have to be able to trust the advice that we're giving you. And especially if you're working with my team, I always tell my docs, like, you have to trust the process. I wouldn't be giving you this advice if I thought it was going to hurt your practice in any way, because I build my business on successful practices. And I wouldn't have made it this long if I were giving out false advice or training doctors in a way that was not ethical or was not something that, that was acceptable. And then this is just my bonus piece of advice. And I want everybody to take a minute and listen to this. When you are hiring, if you're a startup, and when you are hiring employees, be very careful with titles that you use. Probably one of the biggest mistakes that I hear doctors say all the time with their first employee is, oh, they will probably be my office manager. They will be my office manager. Here's the deal, docs. Listen to me. Your first employee, your second employee, your third employee are probably not your forever employees. Right now, employees are going to be with us for 2 to 3 years max. If we get them more, then that's wonderful. And especially when we're in a startup, we're hiring somebody to do multiple roles. But it doesn't mean that means they're going to be an office manager, especially when you've got somebody that's being hired in that doesn't even know our industry. They may be your front office administrator. They may be, give it whatever name you want, but leave the word manager or director out of it. We don't even use those titles until you've been practicing much, much longer in your career. So be very cautious about titles and thinking that your first, second, third employee are your forever employees. That's just one of the things that we learn in business is nobody's around forever, and you should not take it personal if they leave you. It's okay. We're filling a position for what we need right now, and our positions change as our practices grow and evolve.
I think that's great advice. So we're ready to wrap things up and head into the final speed round.
All right.
So are you ready for your final speed round challenge?
Yes.
Okay. If you could start any business right now, what would it be?
I know this is going to sound cliche, but I would still, if it were talking to a doctor, I would still say go 100% in on yourself, bet on yourself, do an orthodontic startup. If you've got an opportunity to do an acquisition, our industry is not going anywhere. So definitely do that. For me personally, I would probably still do the same thing I'm doing. I love what I do. I'm always looking at other businesses, and I would invest in other businesses. But if I had to work in other business, it'd probably still be exactly what I'm doing.
I love it. What is the best investment you've ever made?
Investing in myself. I didn't invest in anybody else. I invested in myself, and I'll figure it out. I'll get it to work. And it's almost kind of controversial in the sense that I'm telling doctors you should rely on an expert, but unfortunately I didn't have an expert to rely on. And I think just betting on myself was my best investment.
I love it. How do you handle work-related stress?
If I get stressed, I've got 3 go-tos. If I'm super stressed, I've got Christmas music on. It's like my go-to for sure. Secondarily, getting out and taking a walk. The best ideas come to me, and usually most of my problems unlock when I can get out and get on a walk. And then third one would just be being outside. Anytime I have an opportunity to just get outside helps me a lot.
Yeah, we know it's a bad day at the office when the Christmas music comes on.
It is a bad day when the Christmas music's on.
What's one trend in our industry that you're excited about?
Honestly, I am just so excited about all of the third-party companies that are out there to help doctors and practices just run a more streamlined business. I love it that we don't have to just have too many employees, that we can really dial in treatment modalities, that doctors, the digital component with treatments. I just love all of that. And that I feel like we are finally at a point where we are, I don't know, listening to the needs of the consumers out there and being able to meet them safely, whether it's financial practices or somebody wanting maybe aligners versus fixed appliances or whatnot. So I think that's my favorite thing right now is just we've got lots of really good change in the digital and the third party component out there.
Great. And what's the most valuable piece of advice you would give someone just starting their career?
This comes from a concept out of a book, Who Not How. But I really believe that when you come up against an obstacle, you should be thinking not about how do I figure this out, but who do I need to put in place to help me figure this out so that I can get to my goal as quickly as possible. Because ultimately, we can get so wrapped up in the how that we can almost stall ourselves out in business, especially when we're pushing towards goals. And it's a hard concept, especially as a new business owner, when you think sometimes I need to spend money or I need to not just rely on myself, even though I just said I bet on myself, but I can give you example after example of example where even myself, I had to say, okay, somebody else can do this quicker, better, faster. And if I can rely on them, then that will ultimately get me to my goal. And so I would say, trust in finding your who's out there to help you get to your end goal faster.
Great. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me on this special two-part episode. I think the audience is going to take a lot from it. I think it was fun to get to see you behind the scenes. And I know I'm waiting for the next Hey Docs episode. I think the audience is too. Can't wait to have you back as the host.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Jordan, for doing this.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.